Right now in eastern Georgia, investigators are working to learn what and who damaged the Georgia Guidestones. So far, we know part of the 42-year-old monument.
Have you ever come across something so massive and mysterious that it forces you to pause and wonder, who made this and why?
These standing stones are enormous and made of solid granite. When you're near them, they are genuinely impressive and imposing, the sort of thing that makes you wonder how ancient people ever managed to raise them up.
For over 40 years, the Georgia Guidestones stood in a lonely field in Georgia, towering slabs etched with 10 unsettling instructions for humanity. Someone built them, but their purpose remained a secret. Then, when they were destroyed in 2022, everything changed.
A unique Georgia attraction that stood for nearly 4 decades is destroyed.
Popular North Georgia monument that's been the source of a lot of speculation over 4 decades.
Stick with us, because what happened next is something you'll want to hear.
GBI is hoping new video will help them nail down the person responsible for blowing up the Georgia Guidestones. Check it out. The GBI says this video shows the person leaving an explosive device at the structure and then running away.
The Guidestones, America's strange Stonehenge. If you've ever driven through rural Georgia, you know the land has a way of holding secrets. Fog clings to the fields. Roads stretch so quietly that even your thoughts seem too loud. And for more than 4 decades, there was one secret in particular that refused to fade. A monument that looked like it had washed ashore from some future civilization. It all began on a cold morning in the granite capital of the world. The kind of morning where even the red Georgia clay felt stiff with mystery. The explosion that shattered the Guidestones still hung in the town's memory like wood smoke. No suspects, no motive, no closure. But Wayne Mullenix, the man who once owned the very dirt the stones rested on, drove his old white pickup like someone holding a secret between his teeth. Elberton wasn't chosen by accident. If you want something to survive centuries, storms, vandals, time itself, you come here. This town sits on top of a 35-mile stretch of some of the hardest granite on Earth, a deposit so huge and so stubborn that locals joke it might outlast humanity. Since 1882, Elberton's quarries have fed a nationwide appetite for stone. Churches, front steps, memorial plaques, and the thousands of grave markers that make up nearly 90% of the town's granite industry. Christian, the mysterious man, couldn't have picked a more unshakable canvas. Blue granite from Pyramid Quarry didn't crack easily. It didn't weather. It didn't crumble. Whatever message he wanted to carve for future generations was going to stay put for a long, long time. And maybe that was the whole point. When Christian first stepped into the Elberton Granite Finishing Company, he didn't walk in like someone ordering a tombstone or a garden bench. He came in with blueprints for something that looked like it belonged in an archaeology documentary, or a prophecy. He wanted slabs 19 feet tall, arranged in a giant X pattern, inscribed in multiple languages, aligned with celestial events, and built in the middle of a cow pasture outside town. The workers stared at him the way you might look at someone who just told you he wants to build an airport runway in his backyard. Polite confusion, curiosity, and a hint of "are you sure?" soon followed. But Christian was calm. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had already imagined the monument standing proud against the Georgia sky. He told them he represented a small group with a mission he never explained. He offered cash, he insisted on secrecy, and strangely enough, the company said yes. It took nearly a year to bring Christian's vision to life. The final monument weighed 119 tons, roughly the mass of 2 full-grown giraffes stacked on an elephant. But every inch had to be precise. This wasn't just a big pile of rock. It was part calendar, part compass, part astronomical instrument. The workers carved 4 towering vertical slabs, a central pillar, and a capstone polished smooth like a gleaming granite table. Everything depended on alignment. One hole in the center stone had to point directly at the North Star, always, no matter the year. Another slit had to catch the sunrise on the summer and winter solstices. At noon, a beam of light had to shine through a tiny cut in the capstone and land on a specific spot on the ground, marking the day with a glowing dot. Christian had imagined a giant stone clock, and he was going to get what he wanted at all cost. Old tools groaned under the weight. Calculations had to be perfect. Even the slightest shift could ruin the astronomical effect, so the workers set the stones with the careful patience of surgeons. When everything was finally raised into place, the Guidestones looked eerily ancient, like they had been waiting for the modern world to catch up. From a distance, the monument resembled a modern Stonehenge. Up close, it was even stranger. Each of the 4 outer slabs carried inscriptions in 8 languages: English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. And they weren't simple phrases. They were instructions, warnings, principles for rebuilding a broken world. The capstone? That was Christian's flourish. Its edges were etched with ancient scripts: Babylonian cuneiform, classical Greek, Sanskrit, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. As if he wasn't just writing for the future, but for the past as well. People came from everywhere to stand beneath the towering stone wings. Some admired the craftsmanship. Some ran their fingers over the inscriptions like archaeologists. Some squinted suspiciously at the messages and whispered words like cult or occult. And then there were those who came for the sky. During the 2017 solar eclipse, more than 1,000 people gathered at the site. Families, scientists, conspiracy theorists, all watching as the stones cast shadows older than the day itself. No matter how you felt about the Guidestones, you couldn't stand beneath them without feeling something. Awe, fear, curiosity, maybe all 3. For 42 years, the Guidestones stood alone in that field, silent but never ignored. They were vandalized, celebrated, prayed over, cursed at, and photographed thousands of times. But the biggest questions: who built it? Why here? What did the messages mean? Stuck around like shadows. Then came the morning of July 6, 2022, when one slab exploded into a shower of granite shards that hit the ground hard enough to shake nearby homes. In minutes, a mystery that had survived decades shattered. Investigators arrived. Theories erupted online. But the strange part? The story didn't end with the explosion. If anything, that was the moment it truly began. Because as the dust settled, people finally paid attention to the 10 rules Christian carved at the top. The rules he believed the future world would need. 10 rules for a new world. The chilling message carved in stone. If you ever stood before the Georgia Guidestones, those 4 towering slabs rising out of quiet farmland, like something left behind by a forgotten civilization, you would notice one line before all the others. It sat at the top, like a warning label for the human race. Short sentence, plain language, no attempt to soften the blow. Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Even reading it feels like being splashed with cold water. At the time the stones went up, the world population had already crossed 4 billion. By the 2010s, we were well over 7. That number, 500 million, wasn't a guideline. It was a subtraction problem. It implied that almost everyone alive didn't fit into whatever world the builders imagined. And the scariest part wasn't just the number itself. It was the medium. This wasn't a scribble in someone's notebook. It wasn't a forgotten blog post. Someone had carved this commandment into solid granite meant to stand for thousands of years. Whoever commissioned it believed this so deeply, they immortalized it in stone, as if preparing for a future audience, perhaps survivors. And if that was the opening instruction, what in the world would the rest of the rules say? The population rule didn't just disturb people, it set the tone for everything that followed. It made every other inscription feel less like guidance and more like a blueprint, a plan drafted by someone who assumed a mass die-off, or worse, was not only inevitable, but necessary. Standing in front of that first commandment, many visitors couldn't help imagining someone, somewhere, with the resources and arrogance to think they knew how many humans should exist. And that's when the second rule hit. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. At first glance, it sounds like something you might hear in a modern wellness podcast. But the words don't sit right. Fitness and guide were the same words used in some of history's darkest social experiments. Anyone who knew even a sliver of 20th century history flinched. The same lines that were once words that masked horror. In the shadows of the 20th century, the Nazis used the same ideas to justify sterilizations, euthanasia programs, and ultimately genocide. They became tools of control, whispered in labs and government offices where lives were measured, sorted, and deemed worthy, or not. Anyone who glimpsed history's darker chapters flinched at the memory of children sterilized, families torn apart, and societies manipulated in the name of improvement. The language of science had been twisted into the language of cruelty, proving that words, like power, can be deadly when misused. This wasn't about parenting advice, it echoed eugenics. It evoked the twisted ideas that justified sterilization programs in the United States, where thousands of people, often poor, disabled, or from marginalized groups, were forced into procedures against their will. Some visitors walked away from the Guidestones convinced the anonymous group behind them wasn't just thinking about how many people, but what kinds of people, and the stones were just getting started. Rule after rule continued in that same eerie voice, calm, confident, disturbingly authoritative. The Guidestones called for a unified language, a single global tongue. Depending on how you read it, that could be about better communication or the erasure of entire cultures, dialects, histories, everything that makes humanity varied and vibrant. Then came the rule urging people to place reason above passion, above faith, above tradition. The message was simple and chilling. Let your logic override your customs, your heart, even your spirituality. To many, it sounded less like an invitation to think clearly and more like permission to overwrite belief systems entirely. Another rule spoke of a world court, a single planetary authority to oversee nations and resolve disputes. Optimists saw a peaceful vision. No more wars, no more border clashes. But skeptics saw something else entirely, consolidation of global power under one system, one hierarchy, one governing body that had the final say. Other guidelines attempted to soften the earlier authoritarian edge. Calls to balance individual rights with social duties, to prize truth and beauty, to protect the planet. But by that point, no one was fooled. The tone had already been set. This wasn't a gentle manifesto. It felt like a manual for after something catastrophic. For decades, no one knew who built the Guidestones. And when you combine mystery, stone monoliths, and cryptic commandments about population control, you get exactly what you'd expect: a conspiracy theory explosion. Religious groups declared the monument satanic. Some claimed it was a portal or a meeting point for occult rituals. Locals whispered about strange lights at night, ceremonies performed under moonlight, even dried blood found on the slabs. Every rumor, no matter how bizarre, found an audience. Others linked the inscriptions to the New World Order, the long-running conspiracy that imagines global elites secretly preparing to unify and rule the world under a single authoritarian system. The talk of a world court, a world language, a controlled population, it all fed directly into those fears. Scholars debated the meaning from a more grounded perspective, but once the internet got hold of the mystery, calm discussion didn't stand a chance. By the early 2000s, the Guidestones weren't merely a curiosity. They had become a magnet for every fear, fantasy, and fringe theory under the sun, and the theories got wilder. Some tied the stones to the Rosicrucians because of the pseudonym RC Christian. Others linked them to the Club of Rome, accusing the think tank of pushing population decline. Still others said the inscriptions echoed the ambitions of the Bilderberg Group, the Illuminati, even Ted Turner. Then came the 2010s, when the internet supercharged everything. Conspiracy influencer Mark Dice, writing under the name John Connor in 2005, called the Guidestones satanic and demanded they be destroyed. Years later, he became a YouTube personality spreading claims about stolen elections and secret global plots. Yet he still talked about the Guidestones as a symbol of everything he believed was wrong with the world. Alex Jones showed up too, calling the Guidestones the birthplace of the modern depopulation movement. To his followers, that was basically gospel. QAnon creators made the Guidestones a recurring symbol in their videos, connecting them to COVID conspiracies and fictional global cabals. Online forums buzzed with theories that the stones predicted pandemics, engineered viruses, economic collapses. Then in 2022, things reached a new level. Georgia gubernatorial candidate Candace Taylor campaigned on demolishing the Guidestones, calling them satanic and tying them to abortion and human sacrifice. In one of her campaign videos, she stared at the slabs and declared, "This is a war between good and evil." After an explosion damaged part of the structure that year, Taylor tweeted that God struck down the monument, something that stunned even locals who had no love for the stones. Sociologists compared the reaction to the satanic panic of the 1980s, when fears about secret cults harming children swept through the United States. As one professor noted, the Guidestones became another stage for the same old anxieties: shadowy elites, hidden rituals, endangered children, apocalyptic warnings. The Guidestones weren't just stones anymore. They had become a symbol, a canvas onto which people projected every fear about the future. From satanic rituals to the New World Order, from eugenics to secret societies, every theory stuck. For more than 40 years, the builders hid behind the pseudonym RC Christian, and the mystery only intensified the firestorm. Were they idealists, elitists, Occultists? Something else entirely? Whoever they were, they carved their vision of the future into rock and left it standing in a Georgia field, certain that someday, after disaster, after collapse, someone would need those rules. And for decades, the world tried to figure out what those rules really meant. But to know the truth, you have to go back to the beginning, back to the man who called himself RC Christian, and the real story that was darker and stranger than anyone imagined. The man behind the alias. In the middle of the blistering 1979 summer, when the sidewalks in Elberton shimmered like hot metal, a stranger stepped into the granite finishing company and quietly changed the town's history. He wasn't dramatic, but he didn't have to be. He wore neat clothes, spoke with a calm, almost rehearsed politeness, and introduced himself as Robert C. Christian. Then he made the kind of request you'd expect from a billionaire eccentric or a doomsday prophet. He said he represented a small group of loyal Americans. He paid in cash. He had no hesitation. And he wanted something no one in Georgia, or anywhere else, had ever attempted. A Stonehenge-sized structure built to survive the end of the world. Not a memorial to the past, a manual for whoever might survive the future. Under his arm he carried blueprints, charts, and a scale model. His design wasn't guesswork. Every slab aligned with solar cycles, equinoxes, and astronomical positions. A machine made of stone. Even in the cool way he spoke, there was something unsettling. He didn't just want the Guidestones to stand. He wanted them to outlast civilization. Joe Fendley, the granite company's owner, listened politely and then politely panicked. The project was expensive, massive, weird, and far too serious to be the prank he hoped it was. So Fendley handed Christian off to the person who could handle money, contracts, and, most importantly, secrets. Banker Wyatt Martin. Christian met Martin the same day. He didn't bargain, didn't haggle, didn't hesitate. He would pay whatever it cost. But he had one condition, and it was absolute. No one could ever know his real name. Not the press. Not Martin's family. Not even after Christian's death. The two men made one of the strangest agreements in modern American history with a simple handshake. Christian explained that his group believed a global collapse was inevitable, whether from war, overpopulation, or political chaos. The stones were meant to guide whoever survived. A civilization starter kit carved in granite, and he spoke like a man who had prepared for this moment his entire life. Martin noticed immediately that Christian wasn't just wealthy. He was educated in a way that felt curated. He knew astronomy like a scholar, engineering like a contractor, religion and languages like a theologian. He quoted scientific data the way most people quote movie lines. Every measurement was precise, every instruction deliberate. There was no guesswork in him. His letters, written in a formal, almost old-world tone, showed the same thing. This man wasn't improvising. He was following a long-planned mission. The Guidestones weren't a message. They were a warning. When the land was bought, 5 acres of quiet farmland on a gentle Georgia hill, Christian vanished as efficiently as he had appeared. No dramatic farewell, no second meeting, and he never returned to see the Guidestones finished, not once in 40 years. But the mystery he left behind did exactly what he expected. It grew. Reporters dug. Documentarians begged. Conspiracy theorists connected dots that weren't dots. But Martin, true to his word, never said a thing. When he died in 2021, most people assumed the secret died with him, but Martin wasn't careless. In the dim attic, a locked metal box waited like a secret guardian, holding everything investigators needed to crack the case. Letters signed with Christian's true name, a trail of receipts and bank transfers, early drafts of the monument's inscriptions, and blueprints for a second, far more audacious monument. And when that box was finally opened in 2025, the alias cracked apart. RC Christian was actually Dr. Herbert Hinsey Kirsten. Kirsten wasn't a mysterious billionaire or shadowy mastermind. He was a well-known surgeon from Fort Dodge, Iowa, a respected figure in his community, admired by many. But behind the professional accolades was a worldview far darker than anyone guessed. Kirsten believed civilization was doomed, not from weapons or war, but from what he saw as humanity's excess. He feared overpopulation obsessively. He dismissed democracy as a temporary illusion, and he didn't keep these opinions to himself. Kirsten corresponded with Nobel Prize-winning physicist William Shockley, who publicly supported racial segregation and eugenics. He donated to David Duke, former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. His writings openly praised population control policies like China's one-child rule. In one letter to Martin, Kirsten explained exactly why he wanted the Guidestones placed in Georgia. The region was a survivable zone, he believed, likely to remain habitable after nuclear war or environmental collapse. The stones, in his mind, had to stand where future survivors would eventually wander, but the most chilling discovery came from the plans found beside Martin's letters. A second monument, codenamed the Directive. The last twist came from an unexpected place. CNN reporter Thomas Lake. Following a trail of documents and an accidental on-camera slip from Martin himself, Lake had suspected as early as 2015 that Kirsten was the man behind the alias. Kirsten's age matched, his location matched, his writings matched, his ideology matched disturbingly well. Decades later, long after the stones had risen and the man who ordered them had vanished, investigators climbing into Wyatt Martin's dusty attic found something no one expected: papers that were far more disturbing than the granite monument itself. The Directive, the master plan behind the monument. After Martin's death in 2021, archivists and researchers combing through his estate stumbled on a metal box tucked away in the shadows of his attic. Its label read simply, "The Directive." Opening it, they found dozens of typed and hand-annotated pages. There was no elegance, no philosophical metaphor, just step-by-step policies, tables of numbers, maps, and instructions, like a military manual written for governing humanity itself. Unease settled over the researchers immediately. This wasn't a theoretical project. This was a blueprint, a plan meant to be executed. The Guidestones, it seemed, had been just a public teaser, a way to plant an idea in stone. The real work was inside this box. The Directive laid out policies that could have reshaped society. It outlined centralized control over resources, detailed mechanisms for selecting who would reproduce, and even instructions for establishing a single global authority. There were sections on regional management, disaster response, and societal engineering, all written with a chilling clinical tone. Population control wasn't merely suggested, it was the core. Families with more than 2 children were to be forcibly sterilized to prevent resource instability. Genetic filtering was suggested to eliminate traits deemed inefficient or undesirable. Post-catastrophe populations were to be culled to sustainable levels to prevent further societal collapse. It wasn't a vague warning carved into granite. It was a policy manual for the modern world. The Directive left no room for debate or compassion. History's darkest chapters echoed here. Kirsten's ideas mirrored forced sterilization programs in America, the eugenics policies of early 20th century Europe, and the population control experiments carried out in developing countries. He used cold statistical language, as though people were variables to be managed rather than human beings. Regional triage, he wrote, would determine which communities survived and which would be sacrificed. Incentives for sterilization were outlined alongside enforcement strategies for non-compliance. This wasn't theory. It was a plan meant to act immediately during Kirsten's lifetime to reshape the living world, not just leave instructions for a post-apocalyptic society. Reading the Directive was like opening a corporate policy manual for humanity. Every phrase was stripped of empathy. Words like sustainability, efficiency, and resource management dominated, while concepts like love, justice, or morality were reduced to footnotes. Where the Guidestones suggested balance and harmony, the Directive demanded obedience and calculation. There was no room for individual rights or spiritual freedom. Every sentence read like a blueprint for control, not guidance. Experts reviewing the text noted that it even foreshadowed discussions now seen in climate policy, bioethics, and population management, sometimes word for word. Kirsten's phrasing on balancing personal freedoms with social responsibility eerily resembled UN documents and pandemic response strategies decades later. It became painfully clear the stones were merely a rehearsal, a warm-up for a game he had planned in meticulous detail. The public monument, so visible and enigmatic, was never intended as the main event. The real plan was hidden, actionable, and ruthless. The Guidestones had sown curiosity, speculation, and conspiracy theories. But the Directive revealed that Kirsten was serious. His ideas weren't for reflection, they were instructions for implementation. Even more chilling was the scope. Kirsten envisioned a global network of monuments, built in remote, stable regions like Patagonia, Iceland, and Western Australia. Each would carry updated instructions tailored to the local population, teaching survivors how to rebuild society under his rules. None were ever built. But the plan existed. Letters in the Attic reference the World Future Council, a small invite-only think tank active in the 1970s and 80s. Kirsten praised its foresight and recommended its principles: international population limits, AI-assisted governance to minimize human error, and centralized courts to enforce laws globally. Though the council dissolved decades ago, Kirsten's ideas lived on, quietly influencing discussions in policy and ethics. As experts studied the directive, they were forced to confront the terrifying implications. One man, operating under an alias, had mapped out a secret master plan capable of controlling populations, resources, and human behavior on a global scale. The Guidestones had been destroyed, but the questions remained. Who bombed them, and why?
The Georgia Guidestones stood for more than 40 years until a year ago when someone set off an explosion around 4 in the morning.
Was it an effort to erase proof of Kirsten's plan, or to prevent its execution? And how much of his blueprint had already infiltrated real-world policy? The bombing, the day the stones fell. At 4:03 in the morning on July 6, 2022, the quiet countryside of Elbert County was shattered. A flash of light, sudden and bright, lit up the early morning fog. Seconds later, a deafening blast tore through the air. One of the Georgia Guidestones' slabs exploded, sending shards of granite flying like jagged meteors. The other stones leaned, cracked, and groaned. But the monument, the enigmatic sentinel of Georgia's farmland for 42 years, was finished. A security camera captured a fleeting silhouette, a figure moving with purpose at the monument's base, pressing something metallic against the stone. Then, vanished into the darkness. The vehicle left behind was a silver sedan, its plates unreadable, its driver's face unseen. In the recorded footage, it disappeared as if swallowed by the pre-dawn mist, never to be seen again. By sunrise, the scene had transformed. Bulldozers and heavy machinery arrived, clearing the remains at a speed that stunned locals. In less than 8 hours, almost 2 million pounds of granite, a monument that had withstood decades, was gone, leveled and hauled away as though it had never existed. Witnesses were in shock. The destruction of the stones felt deliberate, almost ceremonial, yet the pace of the cleanup left no time for proper investigation. No preservation, no forensic study of the slabs. Just rubble turned to dust, hauled off without a trace. Residents and tourists alike were outraged. Those who had come to admire or wonder at the Guidestones found themselves staring at a blank field. Where once stood a monument that had sparked curiosity, fear, and countless conspiracy theories, there was now nothing but grass and silence. Authorities were quick with an explanation. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation labeled the blast vandalism. A lone perpetrator, likely a conspiracy theorist outraged by the Guidestones' messages, was blamed. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives washed its hands of the matter, leaving the case closed within weeks. No arrests, no charges, no trial. Public disbelief, however, lingered. Behind the scenes, whispers began to circulate. Internal notes suggested the bombing was more than random destruction. Some documents called it ideological suppression. Investigators familiar with Kirsten's real plan hinted that the Guidestones were considered a liability, and when a cryptic message appeared anonymously on a dark web forum, the monument was not a prophecy. Rumors exploded. Speculation ran wild. Was the bomber a vigilante, disgusted by elites pushing population control? Was it an inside job to bury Kirsten's vision before the public could fully grasp it? Or just a lone conspiracy believer acting without understanding the full context? No one could say for certain. The silver sedan became as legendary as the blast itself. Security cameras along the nearby roads showed nothing. No license plate, no escape route. Just a ghost car that vanished as completely as the stones themselves. Some locals joked that it had been a portal vehicle, a nod to the Guidestones' own strange, otherworldly reputation. Others shivered at the thought of a carefully orchestrated operation, executed with military precision. The vehicle's disappearance added fuel to decades of conspiracy. Was someone erasing evidence to protect secrets? Or had the world finally witnessed someone enforcing a plan decades in the making? For those who had known the Guidestones personally, the loss was bitter. Wayne Mullenix, who had helped lay the foundation, said quietly, "I was disappointed to think that somebody would go to the extreme to destroy something that has not hurt anybody one way or the other for 42 years. I mean, it's been here. Why would you want it to be destroyed?" Tourists and historians were equally stunned. What had been a public curiosity, a monument of mystery, became a non-event overnight. Local guides stopped mentioning it. Brochures were pulled. The site was walled off. Calls about the Guidestones were no longer answered. It was as though the monument had been erased, not just physically, but culturally. The stones were gone, but the questions, the fear, and the speculation remained, looming larger than ever. Even after the physical destruction, the Guidestones' story didn't end. Reports confirmed no time capsule had been buried beneath the stones. Yet conspiracy theories surged. Who ordered the bombing? Was it a warning, a cover-up, or a symbolic act to ensure the world forgot the chilling blueprint inside the directive? Every angle suggested one thing. The Guidestones, though destroyed, were far from powerless. Their absence only intensified curiosity, suspicion, and unease. Even in rubble, the stones whispered the story wasn't over. Aftermath, the echo of the stones. The field where the Georgia Guidestones once towered is empty. Fenced off and overgrown with grass, it's now just another patch of rural Georgia, unremarkable and silent. No plaques, no markers, no hint that anything extraordinary or terrifying ever stood there. For the casual passerby, nothing has changed. But for those who remember, the silence is deafening. The Guidestones may be gone, but the absence leaves a resonance louder than the stones themselves. People who had once seen the monument as a quirky roadside curiosity now see it as a chilling reminder. And when Herbert Kirsten's name surfaced, the tone shifted completely, from fascination to fear, from puzzle to warning. Suddenly the question wasn't, who built this, but rather, how close did he come to shaping the world? Walking through the field today, it's hard to imagine the massive slabs and cryptic inscriptions that once dominated the landscape. The place is quiet. The only movement is the wind through the grass. History has been wiped away with bulldozers and backhoes, leaving a void that feels eerily deliberate. The silence is heavy, almost accusatory, and a stark contrast to the bold, permanent statements carved into stone decades ago. Before Kirsten's identity was revealed, the Guidestones were an intellectual game, a curiosity, a riddle that sparked debates and photo ops. But when the man behind the alias emerged, the narrative changed overnight. Mystery became danger, intrigue became alarm, and casual observers became uneasy witnesses. People realized these weren't idle words etched in stone. They were a blueprint, a plan, a warning that someone had taken seriously enough to act on for decades. News of Kirsten's true identity and his hidden directive ignited public outrage. Protesters gathered outside government offices holding signs that read, "500 million is not enough," a biting reference to the first commandment of the Guidestones. Citizens demanded transparency, investigations into globalist think tanks, population councils, and the UN, questioning whether quiet policies had already been shaped by the same ideas Kirsten had championed. TV debates, university lectures, and social media campaigns erupted with discussions about morality, power, and the fine line between idealism and tyranny. The revelations didn't just provoke fear, they sparked anger. The men and women Kirsten aligned with, including figures like Rockefeller, William Shockley, and even Kirsten himself, preached population control and genetic fitness while enjoying large families, immense wealth, and lifestyles that often harmed the environment they claimed to protect. To the public, it was a bitter betrayal. Rules for everyone else, but not for the architects themselves. The outrage wasn't just about what had been planned, it was about the double standards of the elite. As journalists dug deeper, connections between Kirsten's plans and modern policies emerged. Climate strategies, public health initiatives, and even family planning programs bore echoes of the directive. The ideas hadn't died with him. They had quietly seeped into systems and structures worldwide. What once felt like the musings of a single eccentric man now looked like foreshadowing, a chilling reminder of how subtle influence can ripple through decades. Even with the stones gone and Kirsten's identity revealed, questions linger. Who funded the original project? Who was truly responsible for the bombing that erased the monument? And why erase the site so completely? These mysteries hang in the air, like dust on the wind, refusing to settle. The Guidestones may have crumbled, and their slabs may now lie in pieces, but their message, and the man behind them, may have shaped far more of our world than we realize. And if that's true, then the real story is just beginning. The stones are gone, but can the echo of their warning stop resonating? What's your take on this? Share your perspective in the comments section. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.